Jake bought a house by the water and parked his old Navy boat there. But the HOA boss lady Karen hated it and started charging him $500 every day to make him move it. She thought she was so smart with her fake rules. Big mistake. Jake found out she was a criminal and got her thrown in jail for stealing $450,000. Sweet revenge. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more HOA stories. The morning sun glinted off the pristine waters of Millionaire's Cove as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison guided his 45-foot Navy patrol boat into the private marina. After 18 months deployed in the Persian Gulf, all he wanted was peace, quiet, and time to heal from the shrapnel wounds that had ended his active duty career. The waterfront community of Seaside Heights wasn't cheap, but Jake's military disability pension, combined with his savings, had been enough to buy a modest townhouse right on the water. The best part? His deed included a private boat slip, a perfect place to dock the patrol boat he'd legally purchased at military surplus auction. But peace was the last thing Jake would get. 3 days after moving in, Jake was on his boat's deck, carefully cleaning the mounted .50 caliber machine gun housing, completely deactivated and legal, serving now only as a historical artifact. The morning was perfect until a shrill voice shattered the calm. "Excuse me. What do you think you're doing?" Jake looked up to see a woman in her 50s marching down the dock, her bleached blonde hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a tennis outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her face was twisted with indignation. "Morning, ma'am. Just maintaining my boat," Jake replied politely, his military training keeping his voice level. "Your boat." She laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "That's not a boat, it's a warship. This is a respectable community, not some military base." Jake set down his cleaning cloth. "I'm Jake Morrison. Just moved into 247 Seahawk Lane." "You are?" "I'm Karen Pembleton, president of the Seaside Heights Homeowners Association. And I'm telling you right now, that thing has got to go. Ma'am, I have a legal right to dock here. The boat is properly registered and I don't care about your rights." Karen's voice rose to a screech that made seagulls take flight. "This is a family community. We have property values to protect. Children play on these docks." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd spent years defending the freedom of communities just like this one, and now he was being treated like a criminal for legally owning a piece of military history. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Pembleton. But everything is completely legal and above board. The weapons systems are deactivated and legal doesn't mean appropriate." Karen jabbed her finger at him. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. We'll see what the community thinks about having a war machine in their backyard." As she stomped away, Jake noticed several neighbors peering out from their windows. Some looked curious, others concerned. But in Karen's eyes, he'd seen something that chilled him. The look of someone who wouldn't stop until she got her way. The campaign begins. Karen Pembleton didn't waste time. Within hours, Jake's phone was buzzing with messages from the HOA management company. Emergency meeting scheduled for that evening. Mandatory attendance. Jake arrived at the community center that night to find it packed. Karen had clearly been busy. She printed flyers with dramatic photos of his patrol boat, complete with sensational headlines like "Military weapons threaten our children," and "Is our marina safe?" "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen addressed the crowd from behind a podium, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community's safety and property values. This man," she pointed dramatically at Jake, "has brought a military attack vessel into our peaceful marina." Jake stood up. "If I may." "You may not." Karen snapped. "You've done enough damage already." But Jake's neighbor, Mrs. Chin, an elderly Korean War veteran's widow, stood up. "Let the man speak, Karen. This is America, not your personal kingdom." Jake nodded gratefully. "Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, recently retired from the Navy. I served 3 tours protecting our country's interests abroad. The patrol boat in question is a legally purchased, properly registered vessel with all weapons systems permanently deactivated. I have every right to dock it at my assigned slip. Rights don't matter when children are at risk." Karen shouted. "What if those weapons aren't really deactivated? What if terrorists target our community because of that thing?" The crowd murmured nervously. Jake could see Karen's fear-mongering was working. "Furthermore," Karen continued, "I've done my research. Mr. Morrison's boat is in violation of HOA Covenant 847B, which states that no vessel exceeding 35 feet in length may be permanently docked in our marina." Jake felt his heart sink. He'd read the HOA covenants carefully before buying, but 847B wasn't in the documents he'd been given. I was never provided with that covenant, Jake said. Karen smiled coldly. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. The boat goes or you face daily fines until it does. The vote starts now. The conspiracy unfolds. The vote was 23-7 against Jake. Within a week, the fines started, $500 per day for violation of marina length restrictions. Jake hired a lawyer, but the legal fees were mounting, and the HOA seemed to have unlimited resources. But Jake hadn't survived 3 combat deployments by giving up easily. He started investigating. Late one night, he was going through public records at the county courthouse when he found something interesting. The original HOA covenants, filed in 1987, had no length restrictions for boats. Covenant 847B had been added in a 2019 amendment, but according to state law, HOA covenant changes required unanimous approval from all property owners. Jake dug deeper. The 2019 amendment showed 127 votes in favor, 0 against. But Jake had the community roster. There were 134 property owners in 2019. 7 people hadn't voted at all, which meant the amendment was invalid. He was about to celebrate his discovery when his phone rang. Jake Morrison? The voice was gruff, older. Yes. This is Bill Henderson. I live at 156 Driftwood Court. We need to talk. Tonight. It's about Karen Pembleton. Bill Henderson was a retired police detective in his 70s, with sharp eyes and calloused hands. They met at a 24-hour diner outside the community. I've been watching what Karen's doing to you, Bill said, stirring his coffee. It's not the first time. What do you mean? 3 years ago, she pulled the same stunt on the Martinez family. They had a fishing boat, 42 feet, perfectly legal. But Maria Martinez was running for HOA treasurer, threatening Karen's power. Suddenly, there was this mysterious covenant violation. Jake leaned forward. What happened? The Martinez family couldn't afford to fight it. They sold their house at a loss and moved away. But here's the thing, I kept copies of everything. Karen forged those votes. Bill pulled out a thick folder. I've got the original covenant amendment. Look at signature number 23, that's supposed to be Harold Kim at 89 Pelican Way. But Harold died in 2018. His signature is dated June 2019. Jake stared at the document. She forged a dead man's signature? That's not all. Signatures 45, 67, and 93, all from people who moved away before the vote. I compared them to property transfer documents. Karen had access to old HOA forms with their signatures and traced them. Why didn't you report this before? Bill's face darkened. I tried. Filed a complaint with the county. But Karen's husband, Richard, is a partner at Morrison, Blake & Associates, one of the biggest law firms in the state. The complaint disappeared. When I pushed harder, I suddenly got a notice that my property taxes were being audited. Jake felt his blood boiling. So she's been running a criminal conspiracy. For years. She's driven out at least 6 families who threatened her control. Made hundreds of thousands in illegal fines. But you're different, Jake. You've got military training, legal knowledge, and you don't scare easy. What are you proposing? Bill smiled grimly. War. Jake spent the next week building his case with military precision. He documented every forged signature, every illegal fine, every violation of state HOA law. But he needed more than documents, he needed Karen to expose herself. The opportunity came when Karen scheduled another emergency meeting to discuss additional security measures in response to Jake's ongoing threat to community safety. Jake arrived early and set up a small recording device, perfectly legal under state one-party consent laws. When Karen called the meeting to order, Jake was ready. Before we begin, Jake announced, I have some questions about the covenant amendments being used to justify the fines against me. Your time to speak has passed, Karen snapped. We're here to discuss removing you from the community entirely. On what grounds? Violation of multiple HOA covenants, disturbing the peace, and, she paused dramatically, I've received reports that you've been conducting weapons training on your boat. Jake kept his voice level. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Pembleton. I hope you have evidence. I have sworn statements from reliable witnesses. May I see them? Karen hesitated. That's not necessary. The HOA board has reviewed them and found them credible. The board reviewed them in a closed session without my knowledge? That violates state HOA transparency laws. Don't lecture me about laws, young man. I've been running this HOA longer than you've been out of diapers. Jake pulled out his folder. Speaking of laws, I've been reviewing the 2019 Covenant amendments. Specifically, the signatures supporting them. Karen's face went pale. Those signatures are all legitimate. Including Harold Kim's signature from 89 Pelican Way? Of course. Interesting. Because Harold Kim died in September 2018, but his signature is dated June 15, 2019. Unless you believe in voting from beyond the grave. The room went silent. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Furthermore, Jake continued, I've identified at least 12 other signatures from people who had moved away or died before the amendment vote. Under state law, fraudulent covenant amendments are not only invalid, they constitute criminal conspiracy. Karen's husband, Richard, stood up from the back of the room. This meeting is over. Actually, it's not, Jake said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. I've filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office, the County District Attorney, and the State HOA Oversight Board. I've also retained Morrison, Blake and Associates to represent me. Richard froze. That's my firm. I know. I specifically requested they not assign you to the case due to conflict of interest. Your managing partner was very interested to learn about your wife's activities. Karen tried to salvage the situation by calling for a recess, but Jake wasn't finished. Before anyone leaves, you should know that Mrs. Pemberton has been operating an illegal conspiracy for years. She's forged signatures, imposed fraudulent fines, and used HOA resources for personal vendettas. The Martinez family, the Johnsons, the Parkers, all driven out by false covenant violations. Mrs. Chin stood up. Is this true, Karen? Karen's face was red with rage. This is a witch hunt. This man is a dangerous criminal trying to destroy our community. The only criminal here is you, Jake replied calmly. But don't worry, justice is coming. Karen stormed out, but the damage was done. Jake could see the realization spreading across the faces in the room. Their HOA president had been running a criminal enterprise. The State Attorney General's office moved fast. Within 2 weeks, Karen Pemberton was arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and racketeering. The HOA's financial records were seized, revealing years of financial manipulation. The investigation uncovered that Karen had collected over $450,000 in fraudulent fines from various homeowners over a 5-year period. She'd used the money to fund personal expenses, including a luxury vacation home in the Bahamas and a new BMW. Richard Pemberton was suspended from his law firm pending investigation into whether he'd helped cover up his wife's crimes. The firm, desperate to avoid scandal, fired him outright when evidence emerged that he'd used firm resources to intimidate Karen's victims. The story exploded in local and national media. HOA Queen's reign of terror exposed read the headlines. News trucks lined the streets of Seaside Heights as reporters interviewed shocked residents. Jake gave one carefully controlled interview to the local news, emphasizing that his goal was simply to protect the rights of all homeowners, not just himself. I didn't serve 3 tours overseas to come home and have my constitutional rights trampled by a petty tyrant, he said. This was about principle, the principle that no one is above the law. The interview went viral. Jake received hundreds of messages from veterans and homeowners across the country who'd faced similar situations. Karen's trial was a media circus. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of her crimes, including the forged documents Jake had discovered and testimony from her victims. The most dramatic moment came when Maria Martinez took the stand. Through tears, she described how Karen's harassment had forced her family to abandon their dream home. She didn't just steal our money, Maria testified. She stole our sense of security, our trust in our neighbors, our faith in justice. We worked 20 years to afford that house, and she destroyed it in 6 months. Karen's defense attorney tried to portray her as an overzealous volunteer who'd made honest mistakes, but the evidence was too damning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Justice served. At sentencing, Judge Patricia Williams didn't hold back. Mrs. Pemberton, you have violated the most basic trust that exists in a community. Homeowners associations exist to protect property values and maintain community standards, not to line the pockets of corrupt officials. Your actions have damaged not just individual families, but the entire concept of community self-governance. Karen was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $450,000 in restitution to her victims, plus an additional $200,000 in penalties and court costs. Richard Pemberton was also charged as an accessory after prosecutors proved he'd helped intimidate witnesses. He received 3 years probation and was disbarred. The Seaside Heights HOA underwent complete restructuring. Jake was elected to the new board, along with Mrs. Chin and several other longtime residents who'd been intimidated by Karen's regime. The first order of business was repealing all of Karen's fraudulent covenant amendments. Jake's patrol boat was officially recognized as a valuable piece of military history, and the community even installed a small plaque explaining its significance. Property values, which had actually declined under Karen's tyrannical rule due to the community's reputation, began to recover. New residents were attracted by the reformed HOA's transparent governance and respect for homeowner rights. The Martinez family was among the first to receive full restitution. They used the money to put a down payment on a new house, in a different community with a functional HOA. Jake's victory had ripple effects across the state. The legislature passed new laws strengthening homeowner protections and requiring independent audits of HOA finances. The Morrison Act, as it became known, mandated that all covenant amendments be filed with county clerks within 30 days and made HOA board members personally liable for fraudulent actions. Jake became an advocate for military veterans facing HOA discrimination. He established a nonprofit legal defense fund that has helped dozens of veterans protect their property rights. The irony wasn't lost on me, Jake reflected months later, watching the sunset from his legally docked patrol boat. I spent years fighting for freedom overseas only to come home and fight for the same freedoms in my own neighborhood. On the first anniversary of Karen's arrest, the new HOA threw a community barbecue. Jake's patrol boat served as the centerpiece of the celebration, decorated with red, white, and blue bunting. Local veterans were guests of honor, and Jake gave a speech about the importance of standing up for what's right. Mrs. Chin, now the HOA's treasurer, announced that the community had not only recovered all of Karen's stolen money but had used the improved financial management to reduce everyone's HOA fees by 30%. Sometimes, Jake told the crowd, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about rebuilding trust, restoring faith, and proving that good people can overcome bad situations when they work together. As the evening wound down, Jake stood on his boat's deck, looking out over the peaceful marina. The same waters that had witnessed Karen's harassment campaign now reflected the lights of a community that had learned to govern itself with integrity. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria Martinez, "Thank you for fighting when the rest of us couldn't. Our new house has a perfect view of the ocean, and every morning I remember that justice is possible." Jake smiled and poured himself a beer. Tomorrow he'd continue his advocacy work, helping other homeowners fight corrupt HOAs. But tonight he'd simply enjoy the peace he'd fought so hard to achieve. The patrol boat rocked gently in its slip, a symbol not of war, but of a veteran's right to live freely in the country he'd served. And somewhere in a federal prison, Karen Pembleton was learning that some battles you simply can't win through bullying and corruption. In the end, the HOA Karen who thought she could push around a Navy veteran had discovered the hard way that justice, like the tide, always finds a way to prevail.